Okay. Now, you've all found the cheat sheet. Okay, I mean, and in this case, maybe you can look at why we have assigned the colors that we have. You can argue with that. I mean, this isn't, there's some subjective judgment in this, granted. But what do you think? Okay, let's get a little discussion here. Okay, we've said, generally speaking, for the nurturers, we're going to give them trust in the area of their character. Generally speaking, they are trustworthy in that question of integrity. So, nurturers, you're solid there with us, unless you give us a reason to not trust you. How about the chemistry side? Now, again, setting aside the cheat sheet, what do you think when it comes to chemistry? The question of, do I like you, and do you have the skill set on a communication basis to get into an exchange where the relationship can grow? What do you think? Do we like nurturers? Generally, yes. Anybody have any caveat to that? Yes. 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 Which is often the experience, even for the extrovert nurturers. There sometimes is a sense that because they hold back a little bit of bringing challenge, when they're around a table, they're the least likely to push back against anything unless they really grow and develop their leadership. So sometimes they leave a little influence on the table because they're almost a little too nice. And some of the voices, like the pioneer and the guardian, sometimes know that the nurturers don't push forward, and so they sometimes will erode a little bit of trust, particularly from some of the more assertive voices. So that's why we've given it a green-yellow. Still pretty strong, but it plays into the third element of competence, okay? What colors are you giving competence? Yellow? Okay. Anybody else? It's situational. Of course it is. Anybody else? Joseph. All right. Very good. Great explanation. Nurturers, does this ring true to you? So if you look at the definition that we have up here, competency is not just the question. I mean, Joe's question was, why do we just assume they're not competent? Well, it's the confidence in their ability to communicate their competence. What we often find, if there's a group of 12 people sitting around a table, who's often the last one to speak up and give their opinion? It's the nurturers. They have an opinion. They actually have competence in an area. They are often, unless they're invited, unless they're pulled, will sit back because they don't want to impose their particular opinion into the discussion, because their first assumption is, the last thing I want to do is be perceived as a bulldog or stepping over top of disvaluing somebody else's opinion. How is that interpreted then by everybody else around the table? The pioneer that's sitting there trying to get something done, and the nurturer doesn't say anything, the pioneer automatically thinks what? They have no opinion and they have no knowledge in this area. I discount their value in this particular question. The trust in them has gone down, not because they're not competent, but because they haven't been bold to challenge. Every pioneer wants everybody to step in the ring with them and fight this out. Nicely, but fight it out. And if anybody's not willing to get into the ring with a guardian or pioneer, the guardian pioneer goes, well, they must not know. Therefore, yeah, I like them as people. They're really good people. They have got great character. But in this area, they're not competent. Therefore, I'm not going to go to them with a question. Does it make sense? Yep. Yep. Precisely. Yep. They will be, they're like sound waves that cancel each other out. And that is a part of what we have to understand here. When you're close between connector and nurturer, the connector is the one who speaks. They got a pretty loud voice. But the nurturer side will sometimes lead you to take some of the edge off of the communication because you don't want to offend anybody. You don't want to appear proud or appear like you're the know-it-all. And the pioneer sits and listens to that and go, well, he must not know very much, as much as you actually do, because you're measuring your communication by not wanting to be imposing.
And it's not a slam on the pioneer for making that.
No, of course not. Absolutely. I mean, how many pioneers? First voice pioneers. Okay, well, of course, right? We've got to get something done in the world, and you're looking for competent people to help you do it. And it's not that you don't value the nurturers, just in this role. I don't necessarily need you on my team for this because you obviously don't know. You don't have an opinion. So what's happened is the nurturer has left influence on the table that actually they could and should have. And then from a credibility standpoint, it's the same issue, which is why we have it as red, yellow as well, because they're not feeling that they have the right to solve someone else's problem, which in many cases is exactly what we need them to do. These are often very, very competent people, but underappreciated in that competency and in the credibility of giving people the confidence to believe, wow, if I just turn the keys over to you, you could actually fix this. So if this becomes what we see from nurturers, if you look at this, okay, what do we naturally trust about the nurturers? We trust their capacity in character and in relationships. And if you think about the nurturers around the room and you look and you go, oh, that's actually true. I like these people, I trust their intent and trust their character. Where does the nurturer leave influence on the table? It's a check they don't cash. They've got a check in their pocket, and what is it? It is in this case, the confidence of their communication, the willingness to be assertive with what they actually do know, and being willing to say, you know what? You need to trust me on this. I know you need to let me do this. And very few nurturers have gotten to the place in their life where they're comfortable with that level of assertiveness. So to grow the influence of nurturers, whether you are one or you're working with one, what do? The whole question with why we're going through this is, how do you elevate their trust? If you're a nurturer, how do you get people to trust you more? And if you're working with a nurturer, how do you come to trust them more? What is it? Speak up. If there's one thing we would say to nurturers, speak up. And so if you're working with them on the team, and chances are in this room, there's a nurturer on your team, because it's 43% of the general population. They need to be invited to speak up, almost like we'll say, in fact, one of the rules of engagement for nurturers is they need to speak first in a team discussion. Pioneers, shut up and talk last. Connectors, shut up and talk second last. Guardians, we want you to ask your questions, but play nice. Nurturers, we really need you to tell us what you think, because again, the nurturers have this uncanny ability to be able to predict how people are going to react to whatever we're talking about. And so we need to hear that. That needs to get on the table. And if you do that, you're elevating your trust. You're elevating the capacity people have to trust you. So the one thing we say, speak up. It's actually, of all the voices, theirs is the easiest to bump up because they've done the hard work of the character and the chemistry. That's actually that. If you don't have character, that's a little bit of a hard hurdle to get over. And this is really a behavioral difference and adjustment that the nurturers need to make. Make sense?
So isn't that also building that relationship so they have that comfort level? I mean, a lot of times you can ask somebody to speak up, they just want to back away.
Absolutely. So the environment, creating an environment where it feels safe for the nurturers. And that's on the teams, that's something on the shoulders of everyone, to create a situation where the atmosphere is it's not thin ice for them to step out. They feel like if they take the step out here, the floor's not going to crash it down underneath them, or they're not going to get attacked right away. Absolutely. And that's a culture question. What's the culture of your team? If you know who your nurturers are, then get into the habit. It's actually like how you do your team meetings, the informal aspect of your discussions and the formal aspect of your discussions. You're all making decisions in teams. And literally, it's something we say is let your nurturers speak first. Let them put their questions on the table first. And the creatives, which we'll do in a moment, it's a similar need that the creatives had, but for different reasons. All right? Is that good? So for nurturers, if you want to be trusted more, speak up. And for those of us working with nurturers, if we want to be able to trust them more, we need to create an environment and a situation that helps them speak up. Because once they start speaking up, we realize, wow, these are like really wise people. And they know more than they say they know. Some of us, some of the connectors and pioneers, we say more than we know. Which creates a different trust issue, right? Which we'll get to. All right, good. Let's go on to the guardians. Okay, the guardian, the voice that is guarding what's been established, what's worked. They don't want to go reckless into a new situation. They want to ask the difficult questions. How are we going to pay for this? How are we possibly going to do that objective when we've already committed to do 4 other things? Those are important, practical, logistical details. And the guardian's going to ask those questions. They are the champions of truth, stewardship of money, of systems, integrity of commitment. If we committed to do it in the past, we are responsible and obligated to not go into something new until we've settled that commitment. Okay? So, we're going to give them green. Is that fair? Because generally, the guardians, how many first voice guardians? Okay, can we drag you across a line that you don't believe is integrity? Guardians, how would you feel if you're on a committee and you feel the tide shifting where the decision's going to be made that you don't believe is integrity in line with the things we've committed? What happens on the inside of you? Yeah, exactly. They'll walk away before they would ever sign their name to something that's not integrity. And generally, everybody knows this about guardians. We're going to give them the character piece. All right. Is that fair? Anybody want to argue with that? Now, we're not talking about individuals. You can have some bad apples who are guardians. But as a whole, this voice is a voice of stability, consistency, and congruency between what we commit and what we actually execute. Okay? How about chemistry? How about competence? And how about credibility? In your groups, And I'm going to accelerate this one a little more quickly. So come up with a color combination. And if you want to look at this and cheat, that's fine. But try to see what you think, because this isn't science per se. This is just generally what we found. What do you think on a color combination? Chemistry, do I like you? Competency, do you know what you're talking about? And credibility, can you apply that? Take a couple minutes. Okay, what do we have for the guardians? What about the chemistry question? Do we like these people? Now, guardians, this is not personal, okay? But
it depends on if they like what we like.
when a tough question comes up, where does the guardian go? And what happens to all of that nice people skill stuff? generally speaking. So what color would you give this? Orange, like red, yellow? Like it's not flat out red, but generally speaking, when we're under pressure and under the gun, where does the guardian go? They prioritize exactness, detail, history, policy, bottom line, and the people priority goes where? It goes second to, we got to be exact here. Now, that's not a bad thing. It's just that's the voice they're bringing to the table. In a faith environment like a church, where everybody talks nice, you add to that, we're in Minnesota, where everybody extra talks nice. If you went to New York City, where Joe's from, you'd have a different social culture of what's acceptable communication. But in Minnesota, in a faith community, and with a Scandinavian background like the Covenant Church, you add all those things together, and it's niceness. The guardian has to do what with their voice? They have to elevate their voice to get above all that niceness, which then appears to everyone like what? I don't know if I like this. So yeah, we could say if they're not careful, their voice is going to be their voice is going to be interpreted on the chemistry side as red, yellow. Particularly if they get under pressure and nobody's listening to them, their tone and tact goes up. They stick their heels down. How about on the competent side? Do they know what they're talking about? Here's what we know about the guardians. If they say they know what they're talking about in a particular area, they do, because their integrity on their character side wouldn't allow them to misrepresent themselves. They aren't necessarily competent in everything, but they'll tell you. If I don't know about that or don't have an opinion, they won't pretend that they know something that they don't. So on the competence side, we'd give them a green, but it's green in the areas where they claim expertise. If a guardian says, look, you can trust what I'm saying on this. I ran the numbers, and this is the number at the bottom line. Guess what? You can probably believe that. If a connector does that, that's another question. All right, so from a standpoint of competence, it's probably green. Now, we're giving credibility a green-yellow, if you see on here, or a yellow. Why did we give them a yellow on that, you think? Yes, because the credibility requires taking your competence and making it work for someone else. And sometimes the guardian gets stuck on the competence principle itself and isn't always able to have the people skill, kind of the negotiation skill, that actually makes it credible and applies it to another situation. So that's going to be kind of a neutral. It's not a negative, it's just something they have to work on. So if we want to say to the guardian, we want you to elevate your influence, what is it they have to work on? For the nurturer, it's speak up. What do we say to the guardian? It's something as simple as listen up. If the guardian gets into a mode where they ask good pull questions, their biggest growth area in influence is asking open-ended questions, not as the interrogator, like this. Those are loaded questions. Ba-toom, ba-toom, ba-toom. But if they ask curious, open-ended questions where they're really learning, they'll elevate their influence because they're elevating their relationship skills. And actually, again, the guardian can actually bump their influence as quickly as the nurturer simply by learning a very simple behavior set. That behavior is listen up. Make sense? Guardians, does this ring true to you? Guardians, when you get under a little bit of stress or pressure, what happens? Like it's just, and the relationship stuff gets prioritized down the list. But what others experience on the other side of you is, ooh, I don't know if I like being with you when you get under pressure. When there's a deadline, I don't know if I like to be in the room with you. And so, therefore, your influence goes down. So, for the nurturer, Speak up. For the guardian, listen up. You do that, your influence is going to grow. All right, let's go on. To the connector. How many first voice connectors in the room? Raise your hand. Raise it high. Really, we need to know who you guys are. Connectors are the translators, the bridge builders. They know a little bit of all the voices. They know everybody's language a little bit. So they're able to explain one member of the team to another. Very, very valuable role, the connector. They are the champions of relational networks, kind of branding and messaging. That's not a bad thing. It just means they represent the issue or they represent the interest in a very specific and deliberate way that makes sense to everybody. You talk to a connector and you're like, I think I get it. I think I know what we're doing. Because the connector has the ability to identify with the people that they're communicating with, to assimilate that person's interest, and present what they're presenting in a way that makes sense to everybody. And we like that about connectors. Now there's a danger side, which we'll talk about in a minute, that can erode their trust to that same capacity. But they're really good at building collaboration, getting everybody to yes. You end up talking to the connector. After the connector speaks in the group, everybody's kind of like, oh, well, yeah, that does make sense. Because they have this innate ability to present an idea or an opportunity or a danger in a way that touches everybody's unique perspective. They're quite gifted understanding people and understanding the process of communication. So what are we going to give them from a connector standpoint or a color? Is that true? Actually, you know what? Actually, that's our first impression. When you first hear the connectors giving their spin, we think, wow, this is a person of character. Wow, I like this person. Wow, they sure sound like they know what they're talking about. And wow, they're telling me they can solve my problem. So first blush, that's what it looks like. Is that actually reality? That's too good to be true. And actually, that is what we've learned about most connectors, is okay, all right, that sounds really good, but it's probably too good to be true. What is their true green? The one that we will give them green on. Chemistry. Do I like you? And it's not fake. These genuinely are people. It's not a spin job. They really do value people. They know how to listen. They know how to identify. They're empathetic. They're great problem solvers. So we are going to give them that. They are the oil, along with the nurturers, they're the oil of relationships. But what about the other three elements? Character, can I trust your intention? Competence, do you really know what you're talking about? And credibility, can you actually solve my problem? Talk with each other. What color would you give the other ones? Okay, let's talk this one out. Connectors, let's have you self-identify on this. Connectors, what are we gonna give you in the different voice configuration assignments here of the elements of trust? How about competence, do you know what you're talking about? Work in progress. It's like on the things that you really do know what you're talking about, you do. On the things that you maybe don't know as much as you say, we might not trust that quite as much. We're going to give that one a yellow because it's not that they're not competent. It's that sometimes their spin leads us to go out further because they're really, really good at explaining things. We sometimes assign them more competence than they actually have. And then that credibility, they have this ability because of how much we like them and how much they like us. They really can solve problems. It's kind of a green-yellow because they're very nimble at actually bringing solutions. But sometimes it's green-yellow because sometimes, again, their competence isn't maybe quite as far out as their propaganda leads us to believe. Where are they going to have the problem of trust? Where's it going to be? Now, we're giving red, yellow to character. Again, this is not personal. Just a second, Joe. This is not personal. We're not talking on an actual personal indictment of character. This is perception of character from others. Your question.
Okay, so if right out of the gate with their life, it's like a solid room.
Yep.
And they haven't done anything yet to demonstrate that you don't have character.
Right.
Why wouldn't they be solid room right out of the gate when the character comes?
Okay, guardians and nurturers, do you want to answer that question?
I guess when I think of connectors, I'm thinking if this was a sales force, all the salesmen are connectors.
Yeah.
And then and this is the one group I could say, okay, I can make a general, and generalizations aren't very, very rarely true, but I could have a general picture of going, I've got to listen to you a long time, so I won't trust you. I won't trust you right out of the gate. I can like you.
Yeah, it's very interesting. When I do this in particularly large organizations, and we walk this through, inside the corporate structure is usually deprived of connectors. Where do the connectors end up getting graduated? They get outside the organization. The sales teams, I'm going to be doing a sales team presentation for that same manufacturing company I was telling you about. They are probably 60% connectors because they're close to the revenue line. Where do we want those people? We want them out making money for the company, of course. That deprives the internal operations of connectors, which is a problem often. But that actually is the particularly nurturers and guardians have a reticence. We've been burned. If you're a nurturer or guardian, like, you bought the fancy cheese slicer at the state fair from somebody that like whipped it up and sold you that at one point in your life. And so you're a guardian, you're a nurturer. It's like, okay, I've been here before. Right? And so it is not inherently a character issue. It's a perception of character that because the connector is so adept, when they're talking to me, they perceive what I need to get to yes. And so they present the scenario in a way that gets me going, well, yeah. If they talk to a guardian, they instinctively know what the guardian needs to get to yes. And guess how they present the presentation? To the way that the guardian is going to be doing this. Well, the guardian then talks to the nurturer over here and says, oh, well, you talked to Mark? And he said that to you? It's not what he said to me. What immediately then happens is that I'm a pioneer connector. My second voice is connector, so I have to watch this. I love making the sale. Like, I love getting everybody to yes. The temptation is that I'll shave off the edge of exactness when I'm talking over here and do it over here, and then these two get together and say, that's not what I agreed on. What happens then to trust? I've actually just, I've not lied. I've not even spun. I just empathized and addressed the issue that's fundamentally in them. The problem is when they get together and talk, it sounds like I said something different. What happens to that from a trust standpoint? It seems like I'm not a person of integrity. You see the danger, connectors? Your gift becomes the very thing that could erode people trusting you. Yes.
So, speaking boldly, that's my connector. How do you avoid that then?
Great question. Guardians and nurturers, what do we say to our connectors? We like them. What do we need from them in order to get over the inherent sense of caution when they speak? We got a little check. What do we need from them? Guardians, come on, you know what you know. Give me the basis behind what you're saying. Yep. We have there's a tool in our toolkit here, and I don't know which number it is in there. It's called Build the Bridge. Okay, we talked about this when we did the voices last time. What the guardians and nurturers need when they hear the story of the connector, and the connector's saying, okay, let's jump across the canyon. We can do this, everybody. And the guardian nurturers are like, that's a canyon. I'm not going to lead my people across unless you build a bridge for me. And what we mean by the bridge is details.
I would also say that I'm looking for if you care about the individuals.
Voila, says the nurturer.
So, if you care about
Yep. 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 So the nurturers are looking for the bridge. The bridge for the nurturer is, do you know the implications if this fails? Do you know what this is going to do to people if you're not right? I'm not going to lead my people across on a rope bridge. You got to give me something more. And for the guardian, it's how does this align with the other commitments we've already made? How's it align with budget? We've got to be realistic about this. So the guardians and nurturers need a bridge. If the connector brings the bridge and is willing to get beyond the close of the sale to actually detail out on a personal and logistics basis, your credibility goes up. And people will trust you more. Fair? So for the connectors, it means slowing down and anticipating what everybody else needs to hear and being sure that you're saying all the relevant information to everyone concerned. And be very aware that people talk. And to make sure that you're being forthright and putting all your cards on the table. Because at the end, connectors, the truth will find you out. Yes.
So why do we still value it that way? Instead of putting connectors, which really should be all day or or at least have that partnership where you have a pioneer partnered with, a 1A, 1B, with somebody who's also going to nurture and have trust. We still, I feel like in the church, we still like, oh, who's the pioneer? I'm going to go follow them. And then behind closed doors, like,
Yep.
they're a jerk. They're not very nice. I don't care about
Well, and the point to all this is we have a natural wiring in our brains, how we were raised, the choices we've made. There's a natural voice set. But the whole reason why we're doing this training and again, we'll use Christian language here, sanctification is bumping that which is not like Jesus up to that which is more like Jesus. So whatever your low voice is, whatever your vulnerability is here, bump it up. And the question is, why do we continually put pioneers in positions of leadership? Well, the pioneers put themselves there by virtue of the fact that they just articulate clarity of purpose in the future more ordered than anybody else, which we'll see when we get here in a minute. Their ability to portray competence and credibility, everybody listens to them and goes, yeah, they're right. But they, on the pioneer side, they will struggle on the character chemistry side for the exact reasons. Their job, and it's the hardest of all growth areas, for the pioneers to grow in the areas they need to grow. And maybe the Christian community has to ask a good, hard question as to who we really do put in leadership. What areas do we value the most? I think in America we value this perception of success that isn't necessarily always God's. So yeah.
So in, whether it's a ministry leadership team, I would think that as I'm listening to this, the best team would make certain that you have, I mean, I can't imagine a team made of all guardians. That would be just horrendous. And likewise, that you want a mixture of all these.
Yep.
And so it's like, okay, how do we go about
Yep.
making certain, okay, on our shepherd's team,
Yep.
do we have all this, or are they natural leaders because they're all pioneers?
It's a great question. Did everybody hear that? So we're faced with this question often in our work because sometimes HR teams will come back and say, well, should we hire for this? Should we position our teams? And the answer we would say is no, because people are people and you're just going to, in essence, get what you get. That doesn't mean that if you have a team that's predominantly weighted to the pioneer voice, it's only 7% of the general population. I'm thinking of a company I work with right now. The CEO and the VPs are, there's 8 of them total, so 7 VPs and a CEO. They are way weighted to the pioneer side. And in a way, that's understandable, right? They're the future-oriented strategists that the company pays to head them in the right direction, right? They, though, have to think for the nurturer voice that's absent in the room. In that group, there's only one that even has a remote high nurture voice. But then to be a healthy team, they all have to think for the voice that's not in the room. So what we would say is don't build your teams around voices. Recognize that every voice needs to have a representation, and it puts the onus on all of us. If you're a pioneer, you got to think like a nurturer. What would the nurturer say? If we don't have one in the room, what would they say? If you're a bunch of connectors, you've got to think, okay, what do the guardians and nurturers need to get across the bridge? The onus then, the humility-based leadership is deferring to the value set that isn't inherently natural to each of us. Exactly. Yes. Yep. So if you have your, let me get somebody's notebook here. So if you've got your notebook, so if you look down here on the copies of the tools, you see number 17, you see the Build a Bridge tool. That's the one we were just talking about. If you look at the one just before that, it's number 16. It actually depicts the principle that we're just talking about here. So reach out to someone. If your team has a disproportionate balance of the voices naturally, you got to know that, and you need to create, we term it an advisory team or advisory board particularly if your team is weighted toward the pioneer and creative voice, which is going to be the easiest and most aggressive of moving into the future, discounting the voice of the nurturers and the guardians, then the onus is upon both sides to find mature people who stand in the middle and can voice the voice that's not represented in the room. And if everybody does that, I mean, this works. This is why we can give the same presentation in a church. I can give the same presentation to a room of school superintendents the same size, to manufacturing workers. It doesn't matter because people are people, and the distribution of the types of people are the same every place we go. Yep.
So my second question is, you mentioned authors. This is a very plausible thing. But can we like potentially change? Can we be talking about
Yeah.
change biblically about like what would Jesus do?
Mm-hmm.
And like I guess depending on who you're talking about, right? You wouldn't give the answer unless you like really like that, right?
Yeah.
But like so like upper world to our lives now, like depending on where you are, who you're talking to, or your audience, could they change?
Great question. What do you think? Absolutely. Now, the first session we did, when we did brain type, that's the hardware we're born with. Now, recent research in something called epigenetics is actually indicating that even the hardwiring can change, which is actually pretty cool. It's hopeful in the sense that that we're far more plastic, and our brains are more plastic. Even DNA is adjustable. It's pretty amazing. But generally speaking, that basic fundamental type will stay with us and doesn't the elements of it can be adjusted, but pretty much that first ring personality, there's certain tendencies that'll be with you when you're 97 and were with you when you were 7 months. And you can see that in watching people develop. On the voice side, we're operating on a premise that because this is more fluid, that actually you can bump up one color code in your growth. If you're a red, yellow, and the reason why we do the training is for that, exactly that. If this was just static and all we were doing was saying, yeah, this just is what is and you can't do anything about it, that'd be pretty hopeless. But actually, if you're a red, yellow connector on the character side naturally, that you're not destined to stay there. There's certain adjustments you can make that actually will bump that up. And we'd say generally you can jump up a whole color code. If something's a flat out red, maybe you're not gonna get to green on that one. But actually we can grow more and more balanced and like Jesus. It's a premise of our faith, right? We are saved in our spirit and our souls are growing in our salvation. Hallelujah. So yes, we can change, and hopefully maturity allows us to bump all that up. And that's, if you want to know why we're here, it's for that. Right? So this is the thing, if you know where the areas that you need particular focus in the grace of God, none of us can do this on our own willpower. Go try to change. Which is the little secret of like what's behind what we do. When I go into either a government agency or a public company, private companies, if we know that there's faith-based there, we can be a little more forthright about it. But if it's a publicly traded company or something in the public sector, you have to be really careful what we say. But at the end of the day, it's Romans 7. And in Romans 7, Paul says, look, I know what I should do. But what does he say? I can't do what I'm supposed to do. And it actually brings us to a position where we know we need the gospel. So we tell somebody, yeah, if you're a connector, you'll naturally be misunderstood, and people will distrust your integrity because of your ability to spin. You need to change that. At the end of the day, can we change our fundamental character without the grace of God? No. So lots of people come up to me as an individual and say, look, I believe all this stuff. I know I need to be a humility-based leader, but I can't. Like anger keeps coming up in me. Well, you can't will yourself away from anger and greed and all those things that are inherent in our sin nature. So guess what? I put a different hat on. So I'll say, okay, well, can I talk to you? I'll put a different hat on. I'm not consultant anymore. I'm going to tell you my own story. And I can bring the message of Jesus and the gospel at that point. But in the power and the grace of God, we can grow. which is why we take the time to come out here on a Saturday morning and learn all this stuff. You can get better as a leader in the grace of God. Good? All right. All right, so what are we going to tell the connectors? We're parked on this a little bit. It's okay? We're going to tell them, so if it's for nurturers, it's speak up. And for guardians, it's listen up. And what are we going to say then to connectors? We're going to say, make sure that you build the bridge, particularly back to your nurturers and guardians. It's tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And if they do that, which again, this is not a personal indictment. They love getting to connectivity and collegiality. They love getting everybody to yes. If they will do that with transparency, their influence goes up. They just have to make sure everybody's on the same page. And that this, when the people are not, the biggest mistake I made as a young leader, when I was a pastor, I went into a church and we were doing, it was a church that had been around for 80 years, a little tiny church, and we were working to try to bring about, this is in California, and working to try to bring change and to move the church forward. And the biggest mistake I made as a young leader was I believed when everybody was doing this, when I'm bringing out vision, I'm connecting, right? And they're doing this, yeah. I believed that I had finished my work in communications, like they're all on board. But I didn't build the bridge. A church that age, with that much history, was loaded with guardians and nurturers. And then when I went charging off, saying, with all the things we were going to do, I turned around and nobody followed. Because I made the assumption as a connector pioneer that when people were doing this, they actually agreed with me. So connectors, be very careful that you don't assume when everybody's doing this that all their questions are actually answered. Guardians and nurturers, is that fair to say to the connectors? Build the bridge. All right. Let's go on. Actually, let's take a break. Yeah, let's definitely take a break.